In honor of it being Halloween, I've decided to tell you a very scary story with the effects of the sun coming in and messing up my camera. Now, a couple of hours ago, I went on the Wikipedia page for the Justice Democrats, where they've listed all the candidates that are backed by this organization that support, left wing views or policy positions. And they are also opposed to the oligarchs, which is I consider to be the most significant matter. And I realized as I looked at the list of candidates for governor, for senator, for congressman, that outside of Ocasio Cortez and the ones that already have a seat like Ro Khanna, there's a very good chance that everyone is going to get destroyed. And when I was looking at the polling that I went to the individual pages of and searched, I would say, oh, this person won, so that means they have a really good chance of getting in, in this after this actual election, and then they're uh, trailing by 20 points or double digits. Wow, and I just kept seeing that over and over and over again, and so the scare of today's Halloween story is the very real nightmare that you may never live to see the Congress get to a point where a majority of its members are not corrupt scumbags. We have 435 seats in the House, for example, and about maybe six congressmen that don't take money from corporations, one of which is retiring to launch his Senate bid against a senator from a red state that he's probably going to lose, even though he's supporting the right positions and becoming more known and raising money. But whatever, people don't follow logic. But nonetheless, when I was sitting here, I said, what could possibly change this for the better? Um, if maybe TYT had talked about some of these candidates more, if maybe they had more volunteers. And it's a really disturbing thing watching CNN be able to get Bernie to go on their show and tell him most of the people you've endorsed have lost. Most of the people you've endorsed have lost. Most of the people you've endorsed have lost over and over and over again. And it's while it's the truth, it's also disingenuous because they're saying this as proof that his positions do not resonate with people. But you have to factor in a lack of name recognition, money, and just everything else needed to launch a successful campaign. Look at the Senate race in California, for example. You had Hartson, who got into the race in November. So what, 6, 7 months before the actual voting took place, and she had the most volunteers of anybody. She was getting a bunch of donations, but she still had no media coverage, and so people laughed at her only getting 2% of the vote. What do you expect when you have a senator who's been known for decades, and a state senator who people again have that has name recognition? I can guarantee you a lot more people could tell you what that person is rather than what they stand for, and that's problematic and really says a lot about where we are currently. But I've been trying to formulate ideas because I kept saying maybe if she had entered the race earlier, and I always weigh it as if, what if I were doing this? And I would think if I were a person who had, no resources, had to start from the ground up, I would announce maybe a year or 2 years before the election took place, and then launch some grassroots campaign. And even though she did that, it becomes harder to do in states that are very large. We have 39 million people here. So even if you get a million to know who you are, you still don't even have enough votes. Ultimately, I am disturbed by the idea that we've gotten to a place where we've said, I'm so happy we have these small victories. You had Nancy Pelosi who said in regards to Ocasio Cortez, oh, that was just a one district, and a lot of people said that she was denying the populist wave that was going to start, riding into the Democratic Party. She was correct. One district that was flipped out of over 400. Um, even if you include the ones that are already in Congress that aren't like the rest of the corrupt pack rather. And it feels like this never-ending cycle because you have to understand if we're getting one person in each election cycle, so every 2 years, right? Which might not even happen. Well, I rather I take that back. It's going to happen with Ocasio-Cortez, but the number of people who aren't corrupt that are in Congress still is small, because and going to arguably stay the exact same if O'Rourke loses that Senate seat, which there's good reason to believe he will. Um, so ultimately, it's going to come down to figuring out how exactly to do this. Um, and if a person is able to get name recognition within their state, that's a good start. But how do you do that? You know, you had Hartson with all these volunteers talking about her over and over and over, and people still didn't know who she was because the local media didn't talk about her. And it seems like the only way you can get people to discuss candidates that are seen as long shots, or if you do, is just generally if you do something that is insane. Like if you looked at the West Virginia race with Don Blankenship, here's a guy who's a convicted criminal that went to jail for trying to save money by not doing checks for coal and having all these people die under his watch. But that person received coverage. That person was talked about because he called the Senate Majority Leader Cocaine Mitch, and was able to get individuals to actively speak about him on these various networks, increasing his name recognition. But if you go out and say, "Hey, we need an increase in the minimum wage and stop all, bombing 7 countries," people don't want to hear it, or rather, the media doesn't want to hear it. Um, and ultimately, when you have a place like TYT only doing 1 interview or 2 interviews or 3 per year with these different candidates, it's not enough. And I bring them up because they obviously have a much bigger platform than this. When you have millions of subscribers on YouTube, and obviously they get their donations on there as well, you would think people would be able to do something with that. And while they've done some, it still isn't enough. And ultimately, what I'm trying to convey here is there is hope for it changing, but there has to be a completely different strategy going into the elections that are concurrent with the next presidential election for 2020. And I don't see anyone saying, yeah, maybe we need to take a step back. It's just blame this event, blame that event. But if I were a serious candidate that wanted to do something, and I lived in, let's say, somewhere like Vermont, or what's another small state, Iowa, I would go around door by door, get a little bit of volunteers, whatever, and actively message people on social media about it. Try to round up support for what I was doing. And I'm not sitting here blaming them. I've tried to be part of the effort of fighting against this nonsense and actively participating and talking about these issues. So maybe if I see a candidate I like, I'll talk about them and highlight their positions, mention where one can donate, campaign for them. But it still is too few people being continuously aware of what's going on. I've realized that as I've kind of had the thing of saying before that I recognize my own insignificance, I do recognize that I believe this to be true. I'm one of the few people that actively is aware of both parties trying to screw most individuals over and trying to do something about it. And my only regret is that it seems like the people who are also aware of this in a lot of cases are not that active, or they don't congregate that much. You see somebody on social media, "Oh yeah, I agree that it's corrupt too," and then that person tweets once or twice a week and then goes back to do their own thing. And it's just that kind of system where I'd rather, if they're going to not actively participate in it, I'm fine with them knowing this stuff, but it always concerns me in whether or not they're going to vote and turn out and actually, remember to show up and make the change of going to the polls. Like this Vote Blue to Save America nonsense. You have people who are tweeting that who aren't going to show up. Um, and also, even if you get this Democratic Congress, do not be surprised if you see the same positions being espoused. It's just this thing where people are not looking at the bigger picture. They just want to believe that there's this quick save that's going to happen. Um, and look, I knew that changing Congress to not being corrupt would take years and years and years. I just didn't think that it would be featured in such a manner to where people who were at the forefront of this stuff were not actively saying in response to multiple election losses, we have to try something different or do something different. Obviously we have a disadvantage with financing and name recognition, but let's try to squeeze something in there. So, like I said, I'm gonna try to talk more about some of these candidates I like while they're in office and while they're not, while they're campaigning. And maybe in 100 years, people will wake up and get tired of getting screwed by two parties that have sold out to the banks and millionaires and billionaires.